Let me start by saying that I'm aware that this is the current Penguins logo. This is an older one. I don't have a decal or decal of that size to turn into a magnet. So, I mean, all this is just on cardboard and magnets, right? So, there you go. Mystery's gone. Sorry, guys. I ruined the mystery. Anyways, I want to talk about Pittsburgh. And I'm going to use the old logo because that's the only one I got that's that big. Um, and I want to talk about last year versus this year because it's easy to look at last year and say, well, they got off to a slow start last year. But this is different. Absolutely different. Last year, they started off the season with a 5-4 loss in overtime versus St. Louis. This year, they won in overtime 7-6 against Washington. But then you look at the rest of it, and there's some similarities. I will agree. They lose 10-1 at Chicago. That, of course, is the game that everybody talked about and laughed about for a while. But then they won 4-0 versus the Nashville Predators. They won 3-2 versus at Washington. At Washington, not versus. They lost 5-4 at Tampa. They won 4-3 versus Florida. They won 5-4 in overtime at the New York Rangers. They won 4-3 at Florida. So minus that 10-1 game, if you can minus that, it's a pretty good start. But then they lost 7-1 at Tampa. So this was kind of a they look great, they look like crap kind of situation for Pittsburgh, right? But after that 7-1 loss, they then won 2-1 in overtime over Edmonton. Then they won at home 2-1 in overtime over Winnipeg. So 2 home wins in overtime. Then they go to Minnesota. They lose 2-1. They lose in Winnipeg 7-1. So again, when they lose big, which makes their goal differential a lot worse. They won in Edmonton 3-2. They lost in Calgary in overtime 2-1, and they lost in Vancouver 4-2 before winning versus Arizona 3-1, which brings us up to the 17-game mark, which is where we are right now with the Pittsburgh Penguins. They were 9-6-2. But here's what was different that year. Matt Murray. Now, the games he didn't play, Antti Niemi, of course, went into Pittsburgh, and it was not pleasant for him, and the stats were ugly, and he took a lot of flack for it. Of course, he would then go through Florida and then end up in Montreal, where he ended up pretty good. But Matt Murray saved 29 out of 34 in that overtime loss versus St. Louis. He saved 25 out of 31, so he was in for 6 goals against Chicago. Niemi got the other 4. He had the shutout over the Nashville Predators. He saved 26 that night. He saved 20 out of 22 at Washington for the win. He saved 43 out of 46 versus Florida. He saved 28 out of 32 at New York against the Rangers. He saved 28 out of 31 at Florida. He then saved 29 out of 30 at home versus Edmonton. He saved 30 out of 31 versus Winnipeg. He saved 27 out of 29 at Minnesota. Saved 5 out of 9 against Winnipeg before getting pulled. Saved 35 out of 37 at the Edmonton Oilers. Saved 17 out of 21 at the Vancouver Canucks. And saved 24 out of 25 versus Arizona. Worthy of note. They lose at Tampa. Both games Niemi played. They lost in overtime at Calgary. So the 3 games that he's not in, they were 0-2-1. He has a record of 9-3-1. He saves 366 out of 404 shots for a save percentage of .906. Not great, but considering there's this start in here where he allows 6 goals on 31 shots, he allows 4 out of 9 shots here. Really, that .906 is still respectable. They score 45 goals for, 59 goals against. In their next 5, they were 2-2-1. So they ended up 11-8-2. After 40 games, they were actually below 500 after this point. They were 19-18-3. So yes, there are some similarities between what happened last year and what's happening this year. But what's interesting is Murray got off to a half-decent start last year, minus a couple of games. This year's been different. So they start with the 7-6 win versus Washington. They then lost at home versus Montreal 5-1. They beat Vegas 4-2 at home. They then go into Montreal. They lose in a shootout 4-3. They lost in overtime versus Vancouver. So at home they lose 3-2. They won in Toronto 3-0. They won in Edmonton in overtime 6-5. They won in Calgary 9-1, and they won 5-0 at Vancouver. And everything looks like it's going Pittsburgh's way. This run right here is better than any run they really had here. They had some close games and some nice starts in here, but they couldn't get things going. This looked like they had turned the corner because they'd won 4 in a row and they'd beaten 4 Canadian teams to do it. But they go home, they lose against the Islanders 5-3. They lose in a shootout in New York against the Islanders 3-2. And then they lose at home versus Toronto 5-0 before losing versus New Jersey 5-1. Losing at Washington 2-1. Beating Arizona 4-0. But that just breaks up the losses. They lost at New Jersey 4-2. And of course last night they lost versus Tampa Bay 4-3. They don't like playing Tampa Bay is what we've learned from this and last season. But Matt Murray's place in this is different. So they're 7-7-3 this year versus 9-6-2 last year. But remember, they were 19-18-3. Where it's different is Murray. 30 saves on 36 shots against Washington. 24 saves on 29 shots versus Montreal. He saves all 38 shots in that shutout against Toronto, which really saves his bacon because almost every other game is a not great start. 41 saves on 46 shots against Edmonton. Still wins it. 38 saves on 39 shots against Calgary. So right in here again. While Pittsburgh's feeling good about themselves, Matt Murray looks like he's rounding back into form. He's getting that save percentage back up there. Everything's going well. And then this happens. Versus the New York Islanders, he saves 5 out of 9. At the New York Islanders, he saves 24 out of 26. Versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, he saves 26 out of 31. So he allows 5 that night. At New Jersey, he saves 23 out of 27. Versus Tampa Bay, he saves 22 out of 26. This is how perilous the life of a goaltender is. You can be one of the best goalies in the league one week, and the next week they're talking about, hey, maybe we should go with the Smith. This year he's saved 271 out of 307 shots directed his way through the same number of games on the schedule. He hasn't played the same number of games. You'll notice he didn't play these 3. Due to injury, he missed some games too at the start of the year. 3 here, 1 here. So he has been out for 7 out of the 17 games, as opposed to last year where he was out for 3. His .883 save percentage is 23 points below what it was last year. And that's despite this run right here. He's still 23 points behind last season. His record of 4-5-1 is a far cry from last year at this point when he had a 9-3-1 record. The interesting thing is, Pittsburgh as a team has scored 56 goals and allowed 55. They've allowed 4 goals less than they had through this point last year. They've scored 11 more. So it really, this is a tale of a team that may very well be in some disarray, and there's talk about trades and whatnot. But don't overfix. Don't overcorrect. Because if you overcorrect, you're really blowing it up. Their next 5, they're at Ottawa, they're versus Buffalo, they're versus Dallas, they're at Boston, they're versus Columbus. I will say this. Ottawa is a team that's been up and down, and it's a team that really, honestly, Pittsburgh, with the amount of talent in this lineup, they should be able to beat Ottawa. Buffalo has been very game so far this year. They've done very well. Pittsburgh should be able to get a win there. And I'm saying should, not they will, because if they will get wins, we wouldn't see them with 7-7-3 as their record. They're versus Dallas. Dallas is poor on the road. They're at Boston. Boston has conniptions with Pittsburgh at times, and they're versus Columbus, a team they know very, very well. They haven't met them in the regular season yet this season, but they've met them a number of times in the playoffs. These teams know each other, and traditionally, Pittsburgh's done well against Columbus. Over the next 5 games, Pittsburgh could very well, I would say a 3-1-1 record is potentially possible, and maybe at this point in a couple weeks, we're talking about how Pittsburgh's pulling themselves off the map. Right now, they are the last place team in the East. But looks can be somewhat deceiving. When you look at this losing streak, it's ugly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Broken up here, but then 6, 7. They've lost 7 out of 8. And these losses are all in regulation minus 1, which makes it worse. They're not even getting points in 6 out of 8 of these games. Is Matt Murray the problem? Well, I can't say that he is. He hasn't had a win since the 9-1 win against Calgary. That was his last win. He hasn't had a win since then. The win against Arizona, that's to Smith. The win against Vancouver, also to Smith. I do wonder, are we going to see a change in goal in Pittsburgh, and is that the problem? And I point this out not because I think, oh, it's all on Matt Murray, because I don't think that it is. But when you look at the scoring stats, they're pretty good. You look at the goals against, they're almost in line with last year, kind of, sort of. But you look at the record of Murray, and it makes you wonder whether that's what Jim Rutherford's looking at. Is Jim Rutherford looking at these numbers right now? Because you know he's going to compare this year with last year. Is he looking at this drop-off, and is he saying he's underachieving and he'll get it back? Or this was as good as it's going to get for this season. He's our backup, and maybe we want to consider making that move. And again, I know there are going to be Penguins fans who say, you absolutely don't trade Matt Murray. You can't do it. It'll never happen. I have seen playoff heroes get traded before. Johan Hedberg comes to mind as a guy who was playoff hero, and not that long after that, he ended up getting moved. It can happen. And for Pittsburgh, again, this core that they have with Malkin and Crosby and all of everything that's built around it, that window, that famous window that they always talk about, is it closing for the Penguins? And if they miss the playoffs this year, does that mean it's closed? So that's where Pittsburgh's at. And of course, everybody's, I've already seen the comments, oh great, Pittsburgh's going to miss the playoffs, win the draft lottery and get Hughes. That would not surprise me in the slightest. I'll probably have some kind of a facial tick if and when that occurs. But let's just look at it for what it is right now. When you look at it on paper, they're not yet in trouble. It's still early enough to turn it around. But what do you do to fix it? The Hagelin trade is the start. But who do you move out next? Who goes? Who do you bring in? Sprong, I don't think there's any reason to move out Sprong, and I don't think you're going to get enough back to turn this around. But how concerned are Penguins fans right now? And how much of what's been happening is goaltending, and how much of it is defense? How much do they miss Schultz on that blue line? A lot of key questions, and I don't envy Rutherford with the job to try to fix it. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. As always, don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I apologize that this looks somewhat crooked. And there, that shows just how I need a new tripod, because it'll just do that where it looks like, oh, he's got it at the wrong level. No, not really. It's just it's that touchy. Okay, there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video, and I'll talk to you again soon.